Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be a video on express singles. And in this video, what I'm going to be doing is just kind of going over like sort of one-shot questions, not in this particular video, but over the next few videos that people might have with express. So first one, I'm just going to go over once again how to set up an express project, or at least at its most bare bones. Again, the great thing about express is that it's minimalist, so it gives you super flexibility on how to use express, as long as you kind of understand sort of like the basic principles of like how backend web servers work, what routes are, and all these kind of things. So essentially here I opened up an empty folder. First thing I'm supposed to do is create a new node project. I can do that by just doing npm init-y. Okay, so that creates a new package.json because that's what Node uses to kind of know what's going on. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to install a couple things. npm install express. Okay, there we go. There's express. And now what I can do is I can create a file. The name of the file doesn't matter. Okay, at the end of the day, like the name of any files, the name of any variables never really matters, long as everything's always referring to things consistently, to the same names. You make sure that something is exported out of one file and imported into another. Like you make sure that everything just kind of flows correctly. So it's more about understanding how the node workflow works than it is about like memorizing some sort of particular file name or particular variable name. So in this case, but typically what you're going to see is that we're creating a web server, so you're going to see like a server.js, but you could literally call it whatever you want. So here's my server.js. I'm going to bring in the node library, const express. Although now in newer versions of Node, you don't have to use the old school Node module system anymore. That's when I used to do like const express equals require express. So this was, again, this module system was created in Node prior to there being any module system inside the JavaScript standard. So there was no sort of standard JavaScript way of doing it. Eventually, JavaScript did come out with a standard. But Node had already kind of come out with this particular system. And now in the newer versions of Node, and I think that's like 17 and up, you should be able to use modules, and actually in the 16s as well, you should be able to use modules. All you have to do is go to package.json. You're going to add a key called type, and then the value should be module. CommonJS would be like using require. Module would be like using the ES6 modules, which is the standard that's built into the JavaScript standard. Now, how does that look like? So instead of me writing const express require express, I would instead write import express from express. Okay, and see, like that's, everyone generally agrees like this looks a little bit more cleaner. Like if you've used React, like this is like just the way things work in React because it uses bundlers to handle that stuff and Babel. But now we can just use it natively in Node, which is cool. So this is like a nice way. But again, this only works if you add this key to your package.json. Okay, and I'm going to get rid of it, but just so you know, you can do that. So I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to change this back to ES6 CommonJS syntax. Require express. And again, what this require function does is that when I give it a name, it's going to go inside my node modules folder, look for a folder by that name, express. So let's see here, express should be right here. It finds that folder and it's going to go to the package.json in there, and then basically whatever, let's see here, usually it points to a particular file somewhere here. File scripts. It's probably based on this. But basically what it's going to do is going to take this index.js and take all the stuff that file is exporting, and that's what I'm importing. That's essentially how that works under the hood. Bottom line is, if you just give it a name, it's importing whatever that library is in the node modules folder. If I give it like a file name, so if I were to say like /express.js, then it's going to import whatever that particular file is exporting. That's essentially how that works. Not too crazy. So essentially, I'm importing the express library, and basically whatever that library exports, like which is really just a big JavaScript object, gets saved into this variable. Great. Now, the actual object itself is a function object. That's how would I know that? Just by working with Express for a long time. So I know that using the Express object, which is actually also a function, I I can create what's called an application object. Does it have to be called app? No, again, variable names don't matter. Okay, I didn't have to call this express. I could have called this cheese. Okay, all that matters is that I'm giving it a variable to save the result of this in. Okay, so generally, again, the variable names never matter. What matters is what's after the equal sign. That's what's determining what gets saved in the variable. Okay, app, and I'm going to say, hey, I want to create this application object, which represents an express app. Okay, which is really like the thing that we're connecting everything to. Okay, and then I'm going to say app.listen, and I can determine what port I want to listen to. Okay, so I can be like process. Well, what I want to do is I want to be able to dynamically choose what port I'm listening to. So what I can do is I can do this. I can say process.env.port. So what happens is that process.env is a JavaScript object that has any environmental variables. These are variables that are not defined in your code, but that are defined in your operating system. Okay, and I'll show you how you can define that in a second. But what if the port environmental variable is not defined? What if like the operating system doesn't have that variable defined at the moment? What I can do is I can do an OR symbol to set a default value. We say, hey, if it's not defined, we'll do that. And then we can pass in a callback. Okay, we can pass in a callback that then leaves us a message. So we'll just say like console.log. Okay, listening on port, and then we use interpolation to just literally put the same thing in there. Actually, probably what would be better is if I did this. Let's create actually a variable called port. So this way I don't have to type that whole thing over and over again. And I can just use port here. Port. See, don't repeat yourself. So if I was going to type this whole thing again, that just tells me that then the results should have been saved in a variable, so that I don't have to repeat writing it again. Okay, the whole DRY dry code. Okay, so essentially all I'm doing is I'm creating my application object. I'm importing Express, I'm creating my application object, I'm setting up a variable to represent whatever port I'm going to use, and I'm starting my server. I'm going to get my server listening. Okay, so I could do it like this. I could be just like node server.js. Okay, and see, it works on 3000 by default because that's the default I set up. Now, what if I wanted to create the environmental variable port? There's a couple of different ways we can do this, but the way you do it through terminal is I could actually just define the variable before the command. So I would say port equals, 4444, and then I would do node server.js. So now when this command runs, this environmental variable will be defined. And see, now it's listening on port 444. Okay, so this is the basics of setting up. And then in this case, now I can start writing routes, adding middleware, all this stuff. I recommend watching my other Express videos to learn about how to do all that. But if you just needed a quick sort of like, how do I set this up? Okay, and this is generally like probably the best way to do it, because especially if you're using like Heroku to deploy your app later on, you're going to want to make sure that you're defining your port based on this environmental variable. So keep that in mind. Last thing I'll put out is that you generally want to set up scripts. It's a very convenient feature. So I'm going to set up the start script. Start script is always generally going to be like your basic, what you want to, so I'll just say like node server.js. And then I'm going to set up a dev script. And you can set up any script with any name you want. And it can run any command that you want. It doesn't have to be running server.js. It could be running some other file, doing something that's not even related to Node. It's just sort of a way to create a shortcut command. It just runs that command when I run that script. So in this case, what I want to do is do Nodemon, which will allow me to run my server. But what it does, it watches for specifically my JavaScript files. So like EJS, HTML files. If those change, it doesn't restart. Only if my JavaScript files change. It'll shut down the process, meaning the server that's running, and then restart it. And the benefit of this is that generally anytime I change the files, I have to restart the server for those files to take place, to take hold. So Nodemon kind of makes that a lot less tedious of me having to shut down and restart, shut down and restart. So, and again, if you're not familiar, anytime you restart the server, you just do Control-C in the terminal to stop the server. Okay, so now what I can do is with any script I have defined, I can type in npm run dev, npm run start, whatever the script is that's how I run it going forward. Okay, this is really useful, especially if you have commands where you define a lot of environmental variables before the command. Instead of typing out all those environmental variables, you can just kind of define it as one script and save yourself a lot of time. That's where that becomes really useful. Last thing is, again, if you don't have Nodemon installed, to install Nodemon, it would be like npm install -g, because you want to install it globally, Nodemon. Okay, so that's how you would do that. So that's the basic setup. Again, all of this will be in the Express singles folder inside my big repo of video code, which will be linked to in the video description. But I'll see you guys in the next video.